Chapter 11. The Blue Lake. Quirrell goes to the Relic Seeker shop on the day he's supposed to go to the Blue Lake. He supposes that's his own particular bad habit, haunting old places. Maybe traveling is only his way of haunting new old places. He figures there's no harm in haunting the Relic Seeker shop one more time. For better or worse, the shop is empty. Just as well. It's time to go. The Blue Lake is a place Quirrell has been before, in his first life, then his second life, and now he feels like he's seen it anew in a third life. He hasn't the faintest idea of how he got from the second to the third. It is as if he just kept going, and somewhere along the way, he'd been reborn into some other form. But he can't quite remember dying. Life just moved onwards until, in hindsight, it had had a shape and reason all along. All of a sudden, at the speed of watching paint dry, Quirrell is still alive. And he's still sitting on this lakeshore, with the same nail he's always had, looking at the waves, as if nothing has changed. At the first sound of footsteps, he looks over his shoulder to see the knight padding across the sand. Their cloak trails in the debris, their nail rests along their back, their mask is expressionless as always.
"Looking well, my friend,"
says Quirrell.
"You're just the same as the last I saw you. Come to sit by the lake shore with me one last time?"
The knight stops next to him, but doesn't sit. They're too small to really warrant it. They're the perfect height to have a conversation with when Quirrell is sitting and they're standing, really.
"It's very beautiful, isn't it? I believe I've already said as much, but I am very lucky to have seen this place."
Quirrell looks down at his lap, where his nail rests easily across his crossed legs.
Beautiful place to visit. Perhaps not a beautiful place to live.
Instead of responding, the knight points to his face. Says Quirrell, and the knight draws a line around their own eye. "Oh, yes, that."
"I decided to keep it,"
says Quirrell, and traces the same shape across his own mask, where the new edges have been redrawn. The acid had worn away nearly half of it, leaving one eye entirely exposed. Where the edges had been jagged and uneven from the acid's bubbling chemical reaction, they are now smooth and sanded into a sustainable shape. The little craters where acid droplets had splashed have been cleaned into proper circles and refilled with darker porcelain.
"I might get some looks, but I'm not the only person who has ever had a half-mask."
The knight tilts their head. Of course they do. Their mask goes all the way around, like a proper eggshell. The knight makes everyone else look like an exhibitionist.
"And the mask maker did say it wouldn't be too dangerous to keep it like this,"
Quirrell adds, before the knight could wonder. The design might not be as stabilizing for the soul as a round mask, but not dangerous for his health by far.
"Besides," says Quirrell, "it's a bit like an old thing that's become new again, isn't it? There's no reason to get rid of it. It wouldn't be right, even. It's got the scars of changing, the marks of a life lived."
The knight ducks their head. Oh. Quirrell tries not to be too fond of them. They'll be separating soon, after all, and there's hardly a decent way to keep in contact with a fellow traveler. This very well might be the last time they see each other. Still, if Quirrell's right, and the seals of hollowness converge in the Black Egg Temple, then the knight has kept their purpose waiting for quite a while. Sooner rather than later, the knight's quest will come to an end, and they'll have to say goodbye and move on. Maybe life requires change, and change requires a little dying in the end. But only a little.
"I assume you've heard from our mutual friend that I'll be leaving Hollownest?"
Quirrell asks. In response, the knight does sit after all. Quirrell smooths one palm down the length of the nail's blade. The inscriptions, feather-thin and light, are barely whispers against his fingers.
"Well, I'll be on my way soon enough. The first place on the list is Snowy Shore, if you've heard of it."
The knight shakes their head.
"Fair enough. I haven't the faintest idea where it is, so I'll have to figure that out first. It'll be an adventure, that's for certain."
Quirrell looks at the knight, side-eyed, as if the knight might be scared away.
And you? If you don't mind me asking, where will you go?
The knight doesn't move.
Come now. Were you not called to Hollownest to undo the Dreamer Seals?
And then, without malice, to his own surprise, Quirrell says,
I hardly think the madam would appreciate her death being squandered.
The knight does not reply. If Lem were here, he'd probably say it smells like procrastination. But then again, Quirrell can understand. Undoing the seals once and for all would mean the end of Hollownest, and the end of the quest that brought the knight here. What do you do with yourself after something like that? Where do you go? Who do you have to become? Goodness. The Blue Lake really never changes, does it? For everything that's happened, something about the Blue Lake, something about Hollownest, makes Quirrell feel like nothing has changed or will change whatsoever, and not in a particularly good way.
I won't ever remember everything, I don't believe, but to break the seals.
Quirrell scratches at the new edges of his mask.
There's someone in Hollownest you've come to see, isn't there? Whether you know it or not, you came to Hollownest with a purpose.
After a long silence, the knight nods.
Have you done all that you need to before you break the seals?
Another silence. The knight nods.
Then, is it not time to go?
The knight looks down. If Quirrell had known what he'd find in the teacher's archives, he would have procrastinated too. Knowing that a monumental shift in your life is coming up would fill anyone with dread, even if it was a good shift. It's one thing to prepare for such an event logistically. It's another to prepare your heart, which always seems to require one thing or another, like a finicky garden. Even knowing that time is of the essence, that lives depend on your actions. The changes in the world remind Quirrell every time that each phase of life is nothing more than a passing dream. For a wild second, Quirrell wants to offer his nail to the knight, to say,
Here, as Monomon gave this to me to keep me alive, I give this to you to keep you alive.
But that would be, more or less, ridiculous, considering that the knight has a perfectly wonderful nail, so clearly crafted for them and them alone. And it'd be no good to haunt the knight with his expectations or burdens.
Someone told me a long time ago, says Quirrell, that the road ahead might be lonely and dangerous, far-reaching, wilder and stranger than we could ever imagine, and to take my nail with me, to keep me alive.
Did he know what Monomon had asked of him unconsciously when he told the knight that the dead should not be burdened with such things?
Although you might know the way forward to break the seals, would I be wrong to assume that it would be dangerous?
The knight's returning stare seems unimpressed.
I suppose it wouldn't be any fun if it weren't difficult,
says Quirrell, amused. The knight scratches their own cheek, tilts their head. What false modesty from such an accomplished fighter.
Then, when you fulfill the purpose that has brought you to Hollownest, Quirrell says, I hope to one day see you still alive on the other end.
The knight looks sideways at the nail in Quirrell's lap, then up at Quirrell himself, at Quirrell's half-mask and acid scars. Slowly, they nod.
Is it time to go then?
Quirrell asks. The knight nods.
I'll be just another moment. I have a few more dues to pay. Are you ready?
After a moment, the knight does not answer. Their mask gives nothing away. They only look back at him like a perfect empty doll, before they stand back up. Without any further explanation, they turn and go, one step at a time, back the way they came to the dark tunnel back to the resting grounds. Always was an odd creature, them. Quirrell watches them go. Just before the black of the tunnel swallows them whole, they stop, hesitate. They look back as if
for once, uncertain. Quirrell nods. Without further ado, they turn back around and disappear. Quirrell hopes they will not hesitate before their fate. Quirrell is trying not to hesitate before his own. Lem still hasn't shown, so Quirrell supposes that's that then. It's best not to stay too long. Blue Lake, like Hollow Nest, is a wonder that makes Quirrell keenly aware that he'll forget who he is if he stays too long. It's time to go, even if it'll make an unsatisfactory end to his curious friendship with Hollow Nest's relic seeker. Maybe that's just how these things tend to be. Nothing dies with ceremony. Unless it is premeditated murder. At last, Quirrell wedges the nail Monomon gave him deep into the shore of the Blue Lake, not a few feet from where it had been when he'd been here last, in just the same way, point down in the sediment, inscriptions shining down the blade's face. So much work and love went into such a weapon. That nail went around the world, let alone across Hollow Nest. All of Monomon's wishes for him to live on, for him to survive the wastes, to carry her heart and soul on his back, all of his past work written on the metal, all of his past selves, every old place he'd ever visited and loved. He hesitates one last time over the nail. Maybe he should take it with him after all. It was a gift, wasn't it? It was his nail, for him, about him, of him. She had meant it with love, after all. He can't help facing it squarely, like a knight before his lord, one last time. Please understand, says Quirrell. This nail will keep me alive, as you hoped. But before I can live again, I bury my regrets here with it. And I bury you with them.
Quirrell bows once, shortly, as you would at a gravesite.
Thank you, he says.
Are you leaving that there?
Lem asks with incredulity. Quirrell nearly jumps out of his shell. He turns, and there's Lem, standing on Blue Lake shore with his fishing pole. The familiarity hits Quirrell with such violence, for a moment he fears he has fallen into a dream again. But no, already the differences between past and present are making themselves known. Lem's pole isn't leaning casually against his shoulder. It is held in a slack grip by his side, forgotten in his incredulity. He has no bag in his other hand. Where would he keep the caught fish? And the entire look of him is a lot more harried than Quirrell remembers. Lem, says Quirrell. He's trying to sound warm because he is happy to see Lem again. He really is glad that Lem finally showed up, and not the various other shades of less pleasant emotions.
You're looking well.
Right, hail and well met. You're going to stick a priceless work of art in a pile of dirt and gallivant off into the sunset?
I believe that I have to, says Quirrell. That nail was given with love and a sincere wish, and I'll carry them both with me for the rest of my life. I know it is inscribed with the greatest act of kindness I've been fortunate enough to have received in my life. But I never wanted the weapon, Lem.
Good, yes, excellent poetry, but that's worth hundreds of thousands of geo, Quirrell. That thing is a work of history, let alone art. Good gods, if you won't take it with you, then
I forbid you from grave robbing my nail,
says Quirrell. Oh, it's a grave now.
Quirrell waves a hand. He'd done it just for his own peace of mind. Explaining such a thing makes it seem silly even just to think about it.
Of a symbolic sort.
Lem eyes the nail.
So there's no real body in that grave.
Quirrell sighs.
It's complicated, Lem.
It's metal, it kills things, it's worth outrageous amounts of money.
The person who made that nail for me,
says Quirrell,
is dead.
Lem stops talking.
She was never buried.
Says Lem, having the nerve to look both disappointed and wrong-footed at the sudden honesty.
I'd rather not carry that nail, nor her corpse with me. It is time that I laid her to rest.
Quirrell gives Lem a narrow-eyed look.
I reiterate that I forbid you from grave robbing my nail.
Lem clears his throat. Ah, good gods, if you wanted a symbolic grave, the entirety of the Blue Lake would work just as well, you know. It's free, even, and isn't a priceless historical artifact.
And yet sometimes living a new life means leaving old things behind. Is it not you who taught me that?
Lem stiffens. I taught you no such thing.
Maybe not in those words, says Quirrell, and brightens, remembering now what it is that he decided to say to Lem over the last few weeks of traveling alone.
But I'm glad you came, because I need to thank you for it.
You're thanking me?
For sharing your home, says Quirrell, and your food, your time, your patience. Without it, I would not have chosen to keep going and travel again. All the days I live and all the sights I see from now on will be thanks for your audacity on this very shore.
Lem's entire face is red. You... What? My audacity? What kind of backhanded compliment is this? Why do you need 20 words in a dictionary to say thank you?
It's not like the process of you changing my life is a field of roses for anyone involved.
I change... Excuse you! You watch your mouth!
Goodness, Lem, expressing gratitude isn't a dirty word. I'm just being sincere.
I owe you an apology! Lem blurts out. He looks distinctly unhappy to have to say such a thing, but not grudgingly or because of embarrassment. He just looks uncomfortable, like he doesn't know what he's doing, would really rather do anything else but admit it. How unfortunate that Quirrell is so well versed in Lem's varying tones of gruff. This might be distinctly the most uncomfortable apology Quirrell's ever received himself by virtue of Lem's uncomfortableness. I didn't want you to leave thinking that I meant what I said, says Lem, because I didn't.
Oh, Lem, leaving only an apology unsaid weighed so heavily on his heart? After all the things Quirrell's left unsaid in his life, lives even, forgetting an apology is an impossibly light crime. Truly, Lem is the better of the two of them. I shouldn't have asked, says Quirrell. I knew that you could never bear to part with your shop. We both have our callings, and there's no reason not to stay true to them.
Lem looks even unhappier now, which doesn't seem right. Quirrell tries another tack.
It's for the best, anyhow. This way, the teacher's archive could be studied for all the secrets it contains. Or not, if you're not interested. It could be yours to do as you wish. He pauses. I'm not entirely sure there's anyone else in Hallownest who'd even know the first thing to do with the archive, honestly.
I suppose I should get started, says Lem.
In the same sort of way someone mentions laundry day was yesterday, and they'd rather not be reminded.
Quirrell tries not to stare too openly. He's never, ever heard Lem so unenthusiastic about any sort of excavation project, let alone the teacher's archive, which Lem was falling all over himself to explore not a few weeks ago. Or is Lem just that uninterested in anything to do with Quirrell anymore?
Picked up any new projects since I've left?
Not in particular, is the absolutely bizarre response.
Truly? How do you pass the time, then?
It passes on its own.
Not going to spread out your toolkits all over the shop now that I'm out of your hair?
It's not my fault the shop is too big for one person, says Lem shortly. Now Quirrell's studying him. Really studying him.
Well, if I find any relics on my way, I'll be sure to send them to you.
With what? The Hallownest Postal Service? Lem stops. If you find relics?
There's relics all over the world, Lem. You, of all people, should know that where there's history, there's relics.
I know that. It's not like I was born in Hallownest. I learned to crack open a sealed relic elsewhere like everyone else.
Quirrell tilts his head. You collected relics on the road before? Were they not as interesting as Hallownest?
I'm not Hollow Nest relic seeker. All relics are fascinating, Quirrell, if you've got the know-how.
Lem pauses.
I just won't pay Geo for some of them.
This is not the first time that it's occurred to Quirrell that he actually knows very little about the person he'd been living with for weeks, perhaps months, although who could really know in Hollow Nest? For that matter, with the extent that Quirrell's kept his own past lives to himself, they both seem to have spent an unusually large amount of time cohabitating while knowing not even the first thing about each other. Maybe the second thing and the third thing and also the last thing and everything in between. But not even where Lem had come from and why he loved relics in the first place.
But they're parting ways, aren't they? What does Quirrell have to lose by asking? Make Lem even more upset at him for prying into his business? The worst that can happen is that Lem declines to answer.
Why Hollow Nest, then?
Quirrell asks suddenly. Lem takes his time responding, so long that Quirrell becomes certain that he's just going to ignore him altogether, until... No people here, says Lem at length. Quirrell laughs shortly. Don't laugh like it's a joke, says Lem. You've heard the rumors too. You must have. I heard this was the place to go if you wanted to find your dreams and never see another living soul again.
Something about the way he says that makes Quirrell pause. That sounds... What's a delicate way to say, like a special kind of solitary hell? Very... ascetic.
Lem grunts. Ugh, for someone so full of secrets, you're terrible at lying.
No, I mean... Well, I did mean it when I said that sounds ascetic. Although you and your hoard of trinkets is rather the least ascetic lifestyle I know of.
Me and my hoard of what?
But even if it's not the life for me, if it makes you happy, then as I said, I won't be the person to stand between you and the life that suits you.
This is when Lem says, in his usual haughty, proud tone of voice, that it suits him very much, thank you.
It does suit me very much, thank you,
says Lem, in an unenthusiastic tone of voice that bugs often reserve for talking about in-laws they're mostly able to tolerate. An echo of a stone falling from the damp ceiling above into the lake plops into the silence. How odd that such a small noise can highlight how truly, unbearably quiet it is. And without that noise, the silence hangs even heavier than before. Before Lem arrived, Quirrell would not have called the lakeside quiet. Now it's almost more than he can stand. Quirrell can only imagine how that newly highlighted silence would grow, would hang heavy upon him until he escaped into the wide world beyond, which was many things, but never truly still the way Hollow Nest could be. He's got nothing to lose. He and Lem will be parting ways no matter what if he doesn't ask. He can ask this question. For the sake of all the dead gods, Lem never shied away from asking a single uncomfortable question about Quirrell's life, and Quirrell's a better person for it, isn't he? It's no crime to return the favor. One good deed goes around and comes around, doesn't it? Quirrell braces himself.
It does make you happy, yes?
Lem does not answer for a moment or two. Then,
it makes me happier than the alternative.
The alternative, Quirrell says, as though he were cave walls throwing Lem's words back at him.
You've seen how I can be,
says Lem.
I'm not exactly good company.
Now Quirrell really does know it's not a joke. And laughs anyway, because what else is he supposed to do with a statement like that?
Oh, goodness, Lem. I've never heard of such nonsense,
he says, and leans over, trying to catch Lem's eye. But Lem keeps turning his face away in such a slight movement that Quirrell might think it was accidental.
Did you think I invited you to travel with me because you were bad company? Of course not. The joy of traveling would be all the more vivid for your company.
Lem gives him a sharp look.
Which is a shame that a relic seeker shouldn't be parted from his relics. But I'm only saying that in a hypothetical scenario in which a certain relic seeker were to change his mind, I certainly would not be the person to say that Lem the relic seeker isn't good company.
Lem smacks his fishing pole against the shore and rounds on him at last. God dang it, Quirrell! Lem cries. Is that where you're going with this? Trying to make me come with you on your road trip again?
Me? Ask a second time? Never, says Quirrell. If you're determined to stay with your relics, then with your relics you will stay. I'm only observing, out loud in your general vicinity, that there was more than a few relics on the open road, not to mention the whole new fields of relics in any place you could visit, and that for all your fears of being unpleasant company, I've yet to see such fears anything other than unfounded.
Go somewhere else and observe it!
Wait, I have one more observation.
Quirrell!
Because it occurred to me while I was traveling to see the mask maker that leaving your shop doesn't mean you can't ever come back, does it?
None of your business to be wondering about me while you're getting your focus fixed.
You can hardly blame me, says Quirrell. It was a rather long journey, and there was nobody else with me. Oh, I also observed that it seems rather silly to rule out travel on account that you don't get along with other people.
You've never even seen me hold a conversation with anyone but you and your kleptomaniac friend.
Well, you won't be traveling with tons of other people anyway. You'd be traveling with me, so it's only my opinion that counts. And I like you just fine.
Lem doesn't respond. Again, how many times is he going to answer with silence? Quirrell's never known Lem to be so hesitant. And just then, a horrific image pops into Quirrell's head with a conviction of a killing blow. Of Quirrell and Lem parting ways here, more or less peaceably, despite whatever uncomfortable conversations they might have almost had about the first thing about themselves that they're only now getting around to, and Quirrell going back to the open road to scavenge for travel partners where he can, which he doesn't mind, truthfully, and Lem going back to his shop in the pouring rain and sitting alone at his desk. Projects spread out across the shop desks, the kitchen growing cold and stale, the sound of rain substituting for the sound of another voice. Quirrell really quite likes Lem's sense of humor, you know. Would anyone else ever hear it again if Lem goes back to his shop now? He wonders, did Lem see with this terrible conviction the worst possible end that could happen when Lem had first found Quirrell on the shore of the Blue Lake all those months ago? Is that why Lem had insisted? Is that why Lem wouldn't leave? Is that why Lem didn't give up?
Just one trip, says Quirrell, a little more forcefully than he'd intended. You can go right back to your shop if you don't like it. You needn't commit. I'll bring you back home myself, and your shop will still be there, perfectly preserved.
Someone will break in and ransack it while I'm gone, and you know it.
There isn't even anyone in this kingdom anymore. Nobody's going to steal your relics. Come on, Lem, says Quirrell. Think about it. There's countless new relics for you to find out there. There's nothing truly that special about Hollownest in the end. What do you really lose just to try it?
Are you really so lonely that you need me to hold your hand? Lem says irritably.
Sure, says Quirrell. It's definitely me who is the lonely one. Please, Lem, I don't know what I'd do without you. One trip.
Lem stares at the blue lake with nearly murderous intent. The waves are close enough to nearly brush his feet, like Lem's going to stomp off into the waves out of sheer irritation.
One,
says Quirrell. Fine! Lem cries and throws his hands in the air. Oh, fine, you tenacious idiot! Quirrell feels his entire face break out into a smile, him smiling at the foot of Monomon's new grave. Good gods, he's appalled at his own audacity. But he can't stop himself. Just the one, just to see how it goes. It's not a guarantee, Quirrell. I'm warning you. You watch. I'll do the one trip and I'll be marching right back to the shop to take a shower.
There's ways to take showers while on the road, you know.
What? In the rain? Like some kind of wild thing?
He says with put-upon disgust. Quirrell rolls his eyes. Aren't the most sought-after bathing spots in Hollow Nest wild springs? Showering in the rain is not such a trial. Lem gives him a disgusted look. Of course there are inns.
So instead, I'll be marching right back to the shop for some other reason I can scarcely even imagine. Possibly diseases, other horrific bodily harm. You're the expert traveler. I'm sure you're picturing a whole menagerie of horrors that will send me scurrying right back here. Beasts, monsters, nightmares even.
Of course not, Quirrell says, perhaps just a touch too smoothly. I can think of no such things.
For someone so full of secrets, you are a terrible liar.
Lem strokes his beard. He's staring down at the rocky shore, at his pole still laying there. And Quirrell knows that Lem's thinking through things, thinking about packing up the shop, thinking about locking up, thinking about what things he's going to need, or what things he thinks he will need. Lem's calculating look is so familiar now, and Quirrell feels hope filling his chest.
I'm going to regret this,
says Lem. Nonsense, you haven't even done it yet.
I'm regretting it already. Regret is already happening. The more I think about this, the more I realize this is a terrible idea. And you've swindled me somehow with your incomprehensible love of weird dead places into thinking that I should take up doing physical exercise in the notoriously dangerous wastes as a hobby of all things.
Then we'd better get going before you think too hard about it, says Quirrell cheerfully.
While you leave your only weapon behind because of some half-cocked ceremony of a grave. It doesn't even have a body in it, as if this were not a blatantly terrible idea.
Then we'll bring your umbrella.
My umbrella? You're going to defend us with an umbrella?
It'll be fun, creative, an adventure, new forms of nail art. Let's be off.
Now?
It's been time to go for quite a while now, says Quirrell.
I didn't even go fishing.
Lem.
This happened the last time I tried to go fishing at the Blue Lake, now that I think about it.
Lem.
Fine.
Lem sighs, and Quirrell beams. Hesitantly, looking terribly out of practice, Lem gives him a grimace that approximates half of a decent smile back.
Fine, you silly, ridiculous bug. Let's go.
They'll have to get Lem's bag, pack up more supplies, lock down the shop. Quirrell was only joking about the umbrella, mostly. So they'll need to pick up a weapon too, maybe a weapon for Lem, even if Lem won't know how to use it. All the food in Lem's kitchen won't be enough, so they'll have to raid some other abandoned apartment's pantry instead. Quirrell can see the road forward clearly, and it is unfamiliar and unknown, and soon to be all his own. But even so, when he goes, he looks back, just the once, at the nail buried deep in the blue lake shore. In the bright golden light across the blue air, he thinks there's a soft acid green in the air, the fizz of electricity and the gleam of the blade, like a memory he still can't pin down. But then it's gone again, as quickly as it had come. When Quirrell turns to go, he does not look back again. Chapter 12. End credits.
We are not walking to Dartmouth with all these bags when there's a perfectly good stagway not half a day's walk away, says Lem, ringing the bell vigorously.
Quirrell thinks that Lem's going to have to get used to carrying his bags everywhere, but he's waiting for Lem to realize he overpacked before Quirrell tells him that he told him so. That rather takes the fun out of traveling, doesn't it? He says instead. It's about the scenic route, about walking there on your own 2 feet. A stag beetle skids into view, and Quirrell cuts himself off. Gods, he hadn't really expected a stag beetle to still be in the stagways, really. The old stag, as he introduces himself, is so delighted to see new passengers using the stagway that Quirrell can't help but be charmed, and he forgets all misgivings about taking any scenic routes. They've loaded their bags before Quirrell remembers he doesn't remember anything about how to use the stagways, and most certainly doesn't remember the signal for Dirtmouth.
"Oh, it's no trouble,"
the old stag says peaceably, as Quirrell helps Lem get onto the old stag's back.
"I throw no stones for forgetfulness, seeing as my own memory is not what it used to be. But I know the stagways, wouldn't forget them on my life. I can take you both to Dirtmouth with no trouble at all."
The old stag's barely gotten out of the station before Lem speaks up.
"Excuse me, Mr. Stag,"
says Lem, in a polite tone of voice that should have warned Quirrell long before the words came out of Lem's mouth.
"I'm not native to Hollownest, so I don't exactly know the species around here. I heard from someone a while ago that stag beetles have rather fragile legs, and so delicate that they never heal if broken."
Lem! Quirrell hisses. You can't just ask a stag beetle about what happens if their legs get broken.
"Oh, I haven't heard that in a long time,"
says the old stag, in the same mild, unoffended rasp. He doesn't even sound winded, let alone slow down.
"I'm afraid to say that's entirely false."
It's what?
Quirrell blurts out. Lem, slowly, turns to face Quirrell with a delighted expression, and Quirrell is abruptly certain that Lem knew exactly what answer the old stag would say before Lem ever asked the question.
If I remember right, it was a rather nasty urban legend back in the day,"
says the old stag.
"Well, the part about stag beetles' legs never healing right is true, but that's hardly a good reason to be put down. No, the legend is the farthest thing from reality. Why, my second cousin broke his leg right around middle age, tragic running with the Deepness tram, and went on to have a lovely career later on as an accountant. Couldn't run the stagways anymore, but he sure could run his multiplication tables."
"Is that so?"
says Lem brightly.
"So you're saying that perhaps a stag beetle with a broken leg wasn't considered useless?"
"Goodness, no! He turned out to be one of the best accountants his office ever had. Far from useless."
"Really?"
says Lem, beaming at Quirrell. The old stag goes on.
"Needed the biggest pair of spectacles you'd ever seen to read a tablet, and more than a few assistants to write the numbers down for him, since he really couldn't hold a pen without proper fingers. But he lived to a ripe old age, and quite liked his career in the accounting department. That takes me back. He got paid rather well for it too, if I remember right."
Quirrell, slowly, sinks down in his seat and pulls his headscarf over his eyes.
"Admittedly, of course, it wasn't easy for him to go from being a stagway runner to a desk jockey,"
says the old stag.
"but it's hardly the end of you. No, hardly worth any dramatics at all."
Quirrell pulls his hood down over his face.
"Imagine that, thinking you're useless over a broken leg."
"Yes, Quirrell, imagine that!"
I get it, Lem.